Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to finally find out once and for all who actually had it harder, the geezers or the young guns. I'm what they call a Zillennial, someone born right on the cusp of Millennials and Gen Zs. Both of our generations get a lot of flack from the Boomers and the Gen Xers.
Don't be a damn victim. Of course you're a victim. Jesus, obviously.
They say we're lazy, our brains are rotten, that we spend too much money on lattes and avocado toast. But what if the truth is actually the other way around? What if it turns out you're nothing special, but you just lived through one of the easiest eras in the history of humanity?
I want you to get up now.
Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes. Working jobs we hate, so we can buy shit that we don't need.
All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it! My life has value!
Huh?
It's 3:30. Why don't you work?
Because I didn't feel like it.
Peter, what's gotten into you?
Okay. I will admit that I definitely cooked up a hot plate of rage bait. But before I set your heart monitors off, just know that I'm only poking a bit of fun. You guys are so resilient, after all. Shouldn't be a problem, right? In all seriousness, I actually want to get to the bottom of a very important question today, and I genuinely want to make sure that everyone gets a fair shake. Do younger millennials and Gen Z actually have a harder life today from a socioeconomic standpoint? Or are the boomers and Gen X right? Could it actually be true that hard people create soft times, which creates soft people, and those soft people are us? Or did we just inherit a situation that is pretty good? Why are we not getting married? Why are we not shagging each other? Where are the babies? Why are we so pessimistic? Let's find out.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. First, you duck, and then you cover.
Since I was so mean to the geezers, I think a great place to start would be by conceding some very important points. In a bunch of ways, life for a boomer or a Gen X was actually pretty rough. First of all, they came arguably as close to nuclear war as we have ever been during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Let me ask you why your government, your foreign minister, deliberately, cynically deceived us about the nuclear buildup in Cuba.
And the fear of bombing dominated a period of their lives.
Do just what to do. These ducks and cover.
Not to mention the fact that some people literally faced drafts to go to war in Vietnam.
The first birthday that now is designated 001, which means for 19-year-olds born on September 14th, that beginning in January, local draft boards will induct those men.
Couple this with crime explosions, crazy high interest rates, a tough recession that pushed the unemployment rate above 10%, huge social battles like the civil rights movement, and you can pretty quickly see that it wasn't always sunshine and rainbows for the old fellers. But we're also facing our own social, political, and kinetic conflict related challenges today. So to keep things as objective as possible, I think we should stick to one specific question today. Do we have the same economic social contract offered to us that you guys did? In other words, does society say to us, hey, if you work just like they did, you'll get the same deal they got? To find out, let's dig in by starting with something known as the Cost of Thriving Index. A lot of you are probably familiar with the general cost of living or inflation, but what about the cost of living what Gen X and the boomers would have thought of as a good life? The classic American dream lifestyle. A decent home, car, 2 university-educated kids. I'm going to put myself in the shoes of somebody trying to achieve that today because, well, I am somebody who's trying to achieve that today. I have a family of 4, except one of our kids is a dog, and she's the sweetest doggy there ever was. But pretend she's our second kid for now because we would like to have more kids anyways. We'd like to have a decent home. We'd like to have a decent car. We would like to send our kids to higher education. That is, if it even makes sense given AI and all that crazy stuff. But what will this cost us today? Well, a man named Oren Cass, chief economist at the conservative think tank American Compass, actually tried to calculate this. As of 2022, which was his latest update to this index, he found that in 1985, it took about 40 weeks of one person's income to cover the big 5 expenses of an entire family. Think of it this way. Since most people probably work around 50-ish weeks per year due to things like holidays and vacation, that means after the first 40 weeks of the year, which brings us to about October, you've paid your mortgage, food for the year, etc., which means whatever you earn for the rest of the year is literally just extra savings. And remember, that's only with one income in the household. But in 2022, it took 62 weeks of income. And 62 weeks brings us to, oh yeah, that's right. There's only 52 weeks in a year. What this means is that it now takes 55% more money to afford this life, and that it is not possible to achieve on just one income anymore. But hold on. Before the Millennials and Gen Zs get a serious victory here, I need to point something out. This cost of thriving index has some big problems in the way that it calculates cost. For instance, it uses the entire cost of healthcare insurance premiums, including the amount paid by employers, instead of only just using the amount paid by employees. This has led to places like the American Enterprise Institute to recalculate their own version of the index. But I personally think they went a bit too far in the other direction. So I recalculated my own modified version, taking into account things like the healthcare insurance premium and other issues. If you're curious about my methodology, you can find it in the description down below. In my calculation, I found that in 1985, it would take 45 weeks of income to afford the American dream on a single income, whereas today, in 2025, it would take 55 weeks of income. That's an increase in cost of 22%, and it still makes this lifestyle impossible to afford on just a single income anymore. So I think this is definitely still a Millennial and Gen Z win here. But what's actually driving this increase? Well, the big obvious one is housing. For the boomers and Gen Xers, housing was typically somewhere between 2 and 3 years worth of income to purchase. Now, they're 5, 6, 7+ years worth of income. Moreover, the standard mortgage payment to afford these homes generally consumed less than 20% of a boomer or Gen Xer's paycheck, even all the way down to only consuming around 12% of their paycheck in the 50s or 60s. Whereas today, they take close to 40% of ours. I mean, imagine today only having to put 12% of your income towards a mortgage to afford a decent home. I mean, what a life. And yes, this even accounts for the fact that interest rates were way higher in periods like the 80s. That didn't matter as much as it would today because home values themselves were much, much lower compared to incomes. But what about renters? How did they fare? The percentage of renters who were cost burdened in the 60s was around 24%, whereas today that number has jumped up to around 50%. Basically, what all of this is saying is at a minimum, housing is at least 2 times as hard to afford today as it was back then. So this is another huge win here for the young guns because housing is usually the biggest budget line in people's personal finances. If you fuck up housing, you fuck up everything. All right, let's switch things up and talk about education. For the older gens, going to school and getting a decent job seemed practically like a given, And that makes sense when you look at this stat.
In high school, one of my summer jobs was actually right here at this place where I helped just clean up and fix up big construction equipment, essentially. I even got to drive around the big excavators. And it was just me and a bunch of old mechanics whose daily diet was like 6 coffees and a pack of cigs. It was kind of fun. But if I worked this summer job back in the 1960s or the 1970s, one single summer would have paid for half of my entire 4-year tuition, including dormitory and food. Half of all that in just one single summer. So when I came back the next year and worked here again, it would be fully paid for. Today, if I were to do that, yeah, right. You're looking at 10 summers in most cases, or in a best case, maybe 4.
So this is another big dub. Okay, at this point, I think the issue is becoming pretty clear. The cost of everything is going up way faster than our incomes. If we just look at simple rolling generations, we can see that we're the only generation where inflation has actually outpaced our incomes. But why? I mean, what is going on here? Is it maybe that we're actually lazy and just don't want to work as much? Could that be why we're not earning as much money as we should be? Well, according to productivity, which literally measures the output of our labor, that's not true at all. Our productivity has grown following the exact same trend line as the previous generations. But our incomes now have the widest gap from being paid accordingly. So what gives? Why are we being shafted?
Is it because politicians refuse to raise the minimum wage? Is it because corporations are hoarding all the profits? Or something else entirely? Figuring out what's going on with incomes will have to be its own video investigation. For now, let's just conclude that obviously, incomes are not keeping up. So where does that leave us? Well, it seems like a pretty clear and easy win for the youngins. But we still haven't even talked about something that should give the old farts some major points. Our world is way more abundant today. My grandma literally grew up without running water in her house. Today, I can get a bubble tea, a drink originating across the world that I am now addicted to, magically show up at my doorstep by pressing a few buttons on my phone. So that makes it seem like our world is way easier. And yeah, maybe we are pretty soft. But wait a minute. Because what type of abundance are we talking about here? This is a very important question because not all types of abundance are created equal. Economists typically split things up into 2 buckets: tradable goods and non-tradable goods. Tradable goods are things that are not necessarily produced in the same place they are consumed. So think of things like TVs, clothes, phones, even digital services. These can be produced cheap overseas and then brought back here. Over time, these things get better and or cheaper. A flat screen TV costs way less than TVs did back in the 60s, but it has way better definition today. Non-tradable goods, on the other hand, are things that are consumed in the same place that they're produced. Think homes, healthcare, education, daycare. These are things that are the basic building blocks of a civilization. You can't outsource a suburban house from China or import another hospital bed from Mexico. These are created in the same country that they have to be used. Now here's the kicker. Back in the 50s and onwards, suburbia was brand new. Land was being opened up, houses were going up everywhere, industries were expanding, and resources were flowing. This meant that there was plenty of these special non-tradable goods. In this type of economy, one breadwinner's income could stretch far because the amount of non-tradable goods was high compared to the amount of people and money competing for it. Fast forward to now, yes, our tradable goods, things like TVs, computers, clothing, and online apps and services have exploded in quantity and quality, but the basics, the things that really matter, like homes, healthcare, and education, haven't multiplied anywhere near as fast. Meanwhile, the other side of the ratio has exploded. Most households have 2 incomes now, which means double the monetary competition over these goods. Populations in North America and Europe have ballooned in the past few years, which just means way more people in general. And the money supply has inflated massively. So today, you've got way more people and way more money competing over an amount of these special goods, which just has not kept up. All while we're taught to just be good little consumers and placate ourselves with all these nice distractions, essentially, and not worry about the important stuff. That's why it feels like a knife fight over a shrinking pie today. And if you were to just hand us more money, because that kind of seems like maybe a solution here is if we're not getting paid enough, we should just give us more money then. If you just handed us more money, that doesn't solve this problem. That actually makes this worse because you're just increasing the wrong side of the ratio. We don't need more money, we need more of the stuff that the money is trying to buy. So in sum, tradables got cheaper and more plentiful, whereas non-tradables got relatively more scarce and more expensive. This is the fundamental imbalance of our time.
It's the most basic starting block of economics, and I feel like a crazy person because it seems like no one is talking about this. So much of the proposed solutions are to just give us more money without also increasing the amount of stuff that is available. Like, is anyone there? Hello? That is a terrible idea. We literally just did that 4 years ago during COVID, and look what happened. Now, what's interesting is that in artificial intelligence circles, this is exactly what people are talking about because they realize this is the problem and they think AI is the solution. They think AI paired with technologies like robotics can create such an abundant world, something they call a post-scarcity world, that we wouldn't even have to compete with one another for anything anymore. We'll look at whether or not something like that could actually happen in future videos, and we'll also talk about how maybe it's just as likely that hyper-capitalism just turns into techno-feudalism or techno-tyrannies. Hope you've all been practicing your English accent so you can properly address your lord. For now, one thing is very clear. As things stand, we are actually pretty cooked. Wealth inequality and populism will almost certainly just get worse. Marriage has become not a rite of passage, but a status symbol to achieve once you've already figured out your entire lives. No one is having kids to replace the next generation, and rates of pessimism about the future are through the roof. As we've talked about in the last few videos, the effects of late-stage capitalism have resulted in capital growing much faster than wages. And when you pair that with the fact that the amount of stuff that people want is just not keeping up with the amount of money and people chasing those things, you pretty quickly get hyper-competitive hyper-capitalism, which is why everything today just feels like an extractive knife fight of every last man for themselves. And I mean, it makes sense. If you can't ensure your own survival, why are you going to care about other people or think positively about the future? Now, with all that being said, I don't think the moral of this story is that we should just use all this data to support ourselves being victims and just curl up in a ball and cry about it. No, the point is that we have our work cut out for us. Our relationship with work and the life it provides for us may be completely different than those who came before us. Yeah, in a lot of ways, work just doesn't work anymore, which is why I'm making this video series, and our social contract is garbage. But no one's coming to save us, and we should be very wary of people who say they are. I think we need to get our own shit together, not to prove it to the boomers and the Gen Xers, but because the world is in our hands now. We're up next, and we need to decide what we're going to do with it. So here's a hot take for us to end on. You know the whole hard times create hard men, yada 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 meme? Everybody knows it. Well, what if the soft people that are going to create hard times isn't us? What if it was you all along? What if the hard people who fought in World War II created the real good times, and the boomers and Gen X who got to live in them, they got soft? What if that softness is directly responsible for the world that we are inheriting right now? Hard times. Hard times that may just be beginning. What if this is our opportunity to create a better world than the one we've been handed?